Under the scorching sun, a single mother was left bleeding on the roadside, clutching her unconscious son. No one stopped, no one cared. But what began as a story of cruelty and abandonment turned into something no one could have predicted. This is not just a tale of survival, it's a story of truth rising from silence, of love, defying bloodlines, and of a woman who lost everything, only to find what mattered most. She thought the courtroom was the end. She thought biology would destroy everything. But in the end, it wasn't DNA that defined family. It was her, and the child who still calls her mom. Watch till the end. This story will stay with you long after the final frame. The Arizona sun was merciless, an unrelenting furnace in the sky above the red dirt roads outside Sierra Ridge, where silence stretched for miles, and the only sounds were the whispering winds and the hum of cicadas trapped in the blazing heat. Rachel Monroe's knees buckled as she cradled her 9-year-old son, Noah, against her chest. His breathing shallow, his skin clammy with fever. Her cotton sundress was torn at the shoulder, streaked with blood and dust. Her feet bare and blistered, and her face once warm and open was cracked with exhaustion and sunburn. Beside her lay a small duffel bag, its fabric faded and zipper half broken, containing nothing but a change of Noah's clothes, a toothbrush, and a nearly empty bottle of water that now rolled onto the gravel like the last breath of hope they carried. The highway stretched endlessly in either direction, desolate, unforgiving. They had been walking for over an hour since being thrown out of the black SUV, not with words but with fists and threats and locked doors. Chase's family didn't need to explain, they simply acted, and in their minds, Rachel and Noah had ceased to exist. No one on that estate, none of the people who once clinked glasses with her during fundraisers, who sent congratulatory notes when Noah was born, had lifted a finger when Delilah Hartman ordered them out. They had stood silently as Rachel begged for help, as Noah cried for water. And now, here under this punishing sun, surrounded by nothing but sand and sky, Rachel sat on the scorched roadside, holding her son like a mother wolf guarding her cub, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please, Noah, don't leave me too." She tried to shield him with her body, though her strength had long since evaporated. His fingers, small and trembling, gripped the hem of her dress, a silent gesture of clinging to life. Her eyes scanned the horizon, dry and red from tears and wind, searching for movement, a sign of salvation. A car, a person, anything. But there was nothing. No phone, no signal, no shade, just the smell of heated asphalt and her child slowly fading in her arms. In another life not too long ago, Rachel would have been inside one of those air-conditioned SUVs, sipping lemonade on a leather seat, maybe humming along to a song on the radio, while glancing at Noah in the rearview mirror. Back then her hair was brushed, her eyes full of plans. But that version of her had died slowly over the years, chipped away by Chase's cold hands, by Delilah's judgmental glares, and by the silence of every family member who claimed to love her but let her drown. She didn't know when exactly she had become invisible. Maybe it was the first time Chase took her credit card and said she didn't need her own money. Maybe it was the first time she cried in the bathroom, gripping the sink, listening to his laughter echoing from another room. But now, here she wasn't invisible, she was a stain on the road. And still she held Noah, whispering fragments of lullabies, prayers, memories. Remember the story about the blue kite, she murmured, her lips brushing his temple. It flew so high, and you said you wanted to be a pilot. Noah didn't answer. His lips were cracked pale, his eyes half closed. Then from the distance a sound, not the cicadas, not the wind, an engine. Rachel froze. She turned, using her last strength to hoist herself to her knees, her hand shading her eyes as dust rose from the western bend. A vehicle approached slowly. An old silver-gray pickup truck battered its grille, dented its mirrors, sun-scratched. She wanted to stand to wave, but her legs trembled, and all she could do was remain where she was, half kneeling, half collapsing. The truck slowed. Then it stopped. The engine idled for a moment, its heat mingling with the furnace of the air, then sputtered off. The door creaked open. Out stepped a man, tall, lean, in dusty jeans and a weathered button-down shirt, his hat shading his face. He didn't come charging forward. He stood still, observing. Something in the way he looked at her wasn't like the others. Not pity, not fear, just attention. Then carefully he knelt a few feet away and spoke, his voice low and even, "I've got cold water, and a truck with AC, and a phone, If you let me help. Rachel blinked, shielding Noah's head instinctively. Don't come closer, she rasped. Her voice cracked like dried clay. The man raised both hands. I won't. I won't touch either of you. I saw you, and I couldn't keep driving. There was silence. Only the wind moved between them. Then he reached into his satchel, pulled out a cold water bottle, and set it on the ground 3 feet away. Here, no strings, just water. He backed away. Rachel's lips trembled, her fingers hesitated. She stared at the bottle like it might be a trick, but then Noah whimpered. His body trembled. She reached forward, crawled on her elbows, grabbed the bottle, and poured a few drops onto his lips. He stirred, barely, but enough. She wept, not sobbing, not loud, but with a shaking, dry cry that twisted from her ribs. The man stepped forward only after she looked up, her expression no longer fierce but broken. My name's Grant, he said. Grant Callahan. I have a ranch 5 miles back. There's a doctor friend of mine. We can be there in 15. She nodded, not in trust, but in surrender. In the truck, the air conditioning hissed softly. The leather seat smelled of old tobacco and saddle oil. Rachel cradled Noah in the back seat, using a wet rag from the glove compartment to cool his head. She didn't speak, didn't ask who Grant was. She was somewhere between reality and collapse. Grant kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not at her, but at Noah, and perhaps through him at someone else. They drove past the canyon, split through pine-dusted hills, the landscape of Arizona unfolding like an old Western novel. Then a long fence appeared, whitewashed, sturdy. Beyond it stood a 2-story ranch house with green shutters and flower boxes. Crescent Valley Farm, home, or something close to it. When they arrived, Grant opened the door for her, but didn't reach in. Guest rooms got the most light. And it's quiet. Rachel carried Noah, her body trembling under his weight. She laid him gently on the bed. A minute later, a woman with gray hair and boots, Dr. Ruth Lang, arrived, her tone brisk but kind. High fever, mild dehydration, bruised ribs, but he's strong and lucky. Rachel sat on the floor outside the room, hands wrapped around her knees. Grant stood silently in the hall. They didn't speak, and yet something passed between them, something unsaid but understood. Night fell. The cicadas sang again, but this time not as a funeral song. Rachel sat beside Noah, holding his hand, watching him breathe. Her back ached, her lips cracked. But inside a flicker, just a flicker of something reawakened. Grant watched from the doorway. He didn't enter, just stood. A man haunted by loss, a woman burned by betrayal, and a child on the brink. But somehow in that moment, something sacred stirred. This wasn't rescue, it was recognition. A silent beginning of something neither of them yet knew would redefine everything. The night air in Crescent Valley carried a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls of the ranch house like a memory too long unspoken. In the small guest room, dimly lit by a single lamp flickering beside the bed, Rachel Monroe sat on the edge of the mattress, her hand gently resting on Noah's damp forehead, feeling the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Each breath he took was a fragile promise that he hadn't let go. The boy's face was still flushed feverish, his left arm freshly bandaged by Dr. Ruth Lang, and though his eyes were closed, he mumbled faintly in his sleep. Fragments of dreams, or perhaps fears, his voice barely louder than the creaking floorboards outside. Rachel had not moved in hours. Her back was stiff, her eyes dry, as though she had exhausted her last tear before she even stepped into this room. She didn't trust where she was. She didn't even know if she was safe, but she wasn't running. Not tonight. From the kitchen came the faint clink of glass and the low hiss of boiling water. Grant Callahan, who hadn't spoken a dozen full sentences since they met, moved with a stillness that was not fear, but habit, like a man used to not disturbing ghosts. He poured a cup of chamomile tea, added a spoon of honey, and placed it on the table across from the second chair at the counter. He didn't call her. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He just left it there in the hope that someone in the house besides himself might need warmth. Upstairs in a small room filled with dust-covered photo frames, Grant stood before a picture that hadn't moved from its spot in 6 years. The glass was clean, the frame polished weekly. It was the only part of the house that never gathered dust. In the photograph, a woman with warm hazel eyes and a smile like spring held a small girl with braided hair and a stuffed lamb clutched tight to her chest. Lauren and Sophie, his wife, his daughter, gone. Taken in a fire that broke out just past midnight 6 years ago, when faulty wiring turned their home into a pyre of memories. He'd tried to save them. The firefighters held him back as he screamed their names. Lauren was still conscious when they carried her out. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "If you love me, find someone. Let her hold you like I did." She died 2 days later. Sophie never made it to the ambulance, and Grant, he never made it back to himself. Until now. Downstairs, Rachel finally rose. Her knees cracked as she stood, her body aching, with the echo of days and weeks of survival without sleep. She stepped lightly into the hallway, barefoot on cold wooden floors, her fingers brushing the wall as though steadying herself on a tightrope of reality. The kitchen light cast a warm amber glow, and there she saw it, the cup of tea, the empty chair, the man at the window. Grant didn't turn when she entered. He only gestured toward the tea with a slight tilt of his head. She hesitated, then walked forward, lifted the cup, and sat. The heat was comforting. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. After a while, Rachel spoke, her voice a barely audible thread. "You didn't ask me anything." Grant remained still. "You didn't ask if I was married, or why we were there, or why no one came for us." He turned his eyes soft but unreadable. "I figured you'd tell me when you're ready, or not. Doesn't change the fact that your boy needed help." Rachel lowered her gaze. Most people ask, then judge, even when they don't say it out loud. Grant exhaled slowly. "I've spent the last 6 years in a house where no one asks anything. Sometimes silence is safer, but it also hurts," she replied without looking at him. "Yes," he admitted, "it does." They sat like that for a while, two damaged souls orbiting each other in cautious understanding. Then she said, "My son's name is Noah. He likes stories about airplanes. I used to read him books at night before everything, before the house felt like a cage." Grant nodded slowly. "And you—" "What's your name, Rachel?" she said. "Rachel Monroe, 32. Used to teach music. Gave up everything when I married Chase Hartman. Worst deal I ever made." Grant didn't flinch at the name. He didn't know it not yet, but he saw the way she clenched her hands when she said it. "He was your husband," was she whispered. "Dead now? Car crash. They blame me. Did you cause it?" She stared at him unblinking. "No, but they made sure it looked like I did. His mother, Delilah, runs that family like a monarchy. I was just the peasant who dared marry the prince. And when he died, I became the scapegoat." She sipped her tea. "They took everything, said I was unstable. Claimed I had no income, no family. I had Noah, but that didn't matter to them. They wanted to strip me of everything, even my right to be a mother, and they left you on the road." "No," she said flatly. "They dragged us out of the car. Chase's cousin hit me. Noah fell, hit a rock. They didn't care. They just drove away." Grant's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but something in the room shifted like air right before a storm. And still she continued. "When you stopped, I didn't trust you either." "You didn't have to," he replied. "I didn't stop to be trusted. I stopped because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." "Why?" she asked, voice fragile. "Why did you care?" He looked at her long and slow. "Because once I lost someone, and I wasn't there to stop it. And every day since then, I ask myself, what if I had been?" She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. His eyes already told the story. Upstairs, Noah stirred. Rachel rose instinctively, placing the cup down her fingers, grazing the rim like an afterthought. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Grant nodded, still watching the night through the window. "If you need more tea or sleep, the room's yours. I won't come in unless you ask." She paused at the hallway, turning her head slightly. "And if I ask, then I'll be there," he said. She said nothing else, just disappeared into the dark. That night, Grant sat on the porch long after the lights went out. He lit a lantern, set it beside the old rocking chair, and held a small wooden figurine in his hand, a carved lamb, once Sophie's favorite. He hadn't touched it in years, but now he let it rest on the armrest, as though finally willing to remember. Somewhere in the house, a child's breathing steadied. A woman's heart dared to soften. and a man long buried under silence began quietly to feel the weight of hope again. Dawn broke slowly over Crescent Valley Farm, spilling muted golden light through gauzy white curtains and painting the wooden floorboards in fractured beams of warmth. The house, once hollow with silence, now breathed with the faint rhythmic stir of a child's recovery and a mother's quiet vigilance. Rachel Monroe stirred in the old guest bed, where she had barely closed her eyes for more than 20 minutes at a time, her head propped against the headboard, one arm protectively cradling her son. Noah's fever had broken during the night. His lips, once blue and dry, now held a hint of pink, and the rising of his chest had grown steadier, less strained. His lashes fluttered, and for a moment Rachel held her breath, terrified to hope. Then his eyelids parted slowly, groggily, as if waking from a faraway place. "Mom?" His voice cracked like a whisper against rough stone. Rachel's breath caught. She cupped his face, pressed her lips to his temple, and whispered, "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to believe it might be true. Downstairs, Grant Callahan was already awake, feeding the horses and moving through the barn with the practiced ease of a man who had made solitude his closest companion. He didn't know why he had gotten up earlier than usual, or why he had spent 15 minutes selecting the cleanest bowl and warming the oatmeal himself instead of leaving it to his housekeeper, who came only twice a week. He wasn't a man who coddled, but something about the child upstairs about Rachel had cracked open a room in his heart long since sealed shut. When he returned to the kitchen, he found Rachel standing barefoot by the doorway, hair slightly tousled, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, but with a quiet alertness that hadn't been there the night before. She wore the same torn sundress, the hem stained with roadside dirt, and held a towel in her hand, damp from wiping Noah's forehead. He woke up, she said, her voice still uncertain, like she didn't quite believe it herself. Grant nodded, then gestured toward the counter. "I made oatmeal. Not fancy, but it's warm." She hesitated only a moment before accepting the bowl and sitting at the wooden table. For several minutes they didn't speak. The only sound was the clink of the spoon against ceramic and the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Then Rachel looked up. "This place, it's not what I expected." Grant arched a brow. "What were you expecting?" She gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not sure. Maybe coldness or pity. I'm used to people doing nice things just to feel good about themselves." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "No," she said after a pause. "That's what makes it strange." Grant leaned back against the counter, arms folded, gaze steady. "Strange isn't always bad." Rachel looked down at her bowl. "I don't know how long we can stay. I mean, we shouldn't overstay. I just needed a place to get him stable, and then I'll find something. A shelter, or something." "You don't have to leave right away," Grant replied simply. "There's plenty of space here. No one will bother you." "Why?" She asked, not accusingly, but genuinely. "Why would you offer that? You don't know me. You don't know what people are saying." "I know what I saw," he answered. "A mother trying to keep her kid alive. That's enough." Rachel's eyes shimmered, though she quickly blinked the emotion away. "You're the first person who hasn't asked what I did wrong. We've all done things wrong," he said, "but trying to survive, that's not one of them." Later that morning, Dr. Ruth Lang returned for a follow-up. She checked Noah's vitals, gave him a glucose supplement, and taught Rachel how to clean the bandages. "The boy's resilient," she said, glancing at Rachel with a hint of admiration. "Wonder where he gets it." Rachel smiled faintly. After the doctor left, Grant walked Rachel to the back of the house, where a small garden lay in partial bloom, hemmed in by a low wooden fence, and wildflowers peeking through the cracks. A swing creaked slightly in the breeze, a child's swing. Rachel noticed it immediately. Was that hers? She asked, her voice barely a murmur. Grant didn't need to ask who she meant. "Yeah, Sophie. She used to spend hours out here. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on the swing, and I'd have to carry her inside." Rachel said nothing, but her fingers reached out and gently pushed the swing. It moved slightly, then slowed, a gentle arc, like the echo of a laugh that once lived here. "I'm sorry," she said, "for your loss." "You don't have to be," Grant replied. "Grief doesn't need sympathy, just space." They stood there, the past drifting around them like dust motes in the air. After a while, Rachel asked, "Do you believe in fate?" "I believe in moments," he said, "and the choices we make inside them." That night, Noah sat propped up with a pillow, eating crackers and watching the muted television in the guest room. Rachel sat beside him, and when he finished, He turned to her with wide, solemn eyes. "Mom, do we live here now?" She paused. "No, sweetheart. We're just staying for a little while. But it feels nicer than any place we've lived before." Rachel swallowed hard. "I know, but nice things don't always last. Is Mr. Grant nice?" "Yes, I think he is. Can he be my dad?" The question hit Rachel like a hammer to the chest. Her breath caught. "Noah! Not like real dad," the boy added quickly. "Like pretend dad. The kind who doesn't yell or make you cry." Rachel felt tears rising uninvited. "Baby, we can't just ask people to be in our lives like that." "Why not?" he asked, completely serious. "I just want you to be happy." Rachel pulled him close, pressing her face into his hair, trying not to let him see the way her hands trembled. Outside the room, Grant stood at the end of the hallway, unmoving, having heard every word. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, but his heart, once a locked room, felt something crack, and through that crack came warmth. The next morning, Rachel found a note on the kitchen table. "There's a box of clothes upstairs, Sophie's old things. Some might fit Noah, if it's okay." There was no signature, just that offer, simple, respectful. Rachel opened the closet in the spare room and found the box. She hesitated, her hand on the lid. Then she opened it slowly. Inside were folded shirts, little overalls, a pair of rain boots with tiny clouds on them, and a small denim jacket with Sophie's name sewn on the collar. Rachel's fingers trembled as she lifted the jacket, pressing it to her face. There was a faint scent of lavender and something else: childhood, innocence, love. "Thank you," she whispered to the room. That afternoon, Rachel cleaned the guest room, not because she had to, but because it felt right. She washed the sheets, dusted the windowsills, organized the small bookshelf by the bed. Then she took a damp rag and cleaned the corners no one had touched in years. Grant passed by the doorway and paused. "You don't have to do that," he said. Rachel looked up, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "I know, but I want to." He nodded. "Well, let me know if you want to stay longer." "No pressure?" She didn't answer right away. "Then I think I'd like that. For Noah." He smiled, the first real one she had seen, and in that small moment something shifted between them, still undefined, still tender, but real. That night, as the stars blinked over the hills and the crickets resumed their songs, Rachel stood outside on the porch wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Grant joined her, a mug of coffee in hand. "You know," he said softly, "I've lived in this house alone for 6 years. Never thought I'd hear footsteps upstairs again, or a kid's laughter echo in the hallway." "Is it hard?" she asked. "Letting people back in?" He stared into the darkness. "Harder than losing them?" "No, but it's different. It's scary, because you never really know when you're ready until someone's already standing in the doorway." Rachel turned to him. "Well, I didn't come here to make anything harder. Just to breathe." "Then breathe," he said. "As long as you need." She looked away, her eyes moist. "No one said that to me in years. Then let it be the first of many." And they stood there, not touching, not speaking, but sharing a silence that felt more like home than any words could provide. Inside the house, Noah slept soundly for the first time in days. His fever was gone. His fingers were still curled beneath the denim jacket with Sophie's name on it. Upstairs, where grief had once taken root, something softer began to grow slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. A man who had stopped believing in second chances had opened his door. A woman who had been cast out had found shelter not in walls, but in dignity. And a child who once lay unconscious by the road now dreamed of airplanes again under the safe sky of Crescent Valley. The sun had barely begun its slow climb over the red ridges of Sierra Valley when Rachel Monroe stepped outside, with a towel draped over her shoulder and a wicker basket full of laundry clutched in her arms. The crisp morning air catching strands of her hair and lifting them gently like fingers brushing a memory. The ground beneath her bare feet was cool, the kind of cool that reminded her she was still alive, still breathing, still tethered to something real. The wooden clothesline behind Crescent Valley Farm creaked in the wind as she began to hang Noah's small shirts beside the long skirts and cotton linens she had washed by hand just before sunrise. There was a peace to the task, domestic quiet. Something she hadn't felt since her first year of marriage, before the lies, before the bruises hidden under long sleeves, before the lawyers and the whispers and the hollow promises that had built a gilded cage. From the kitchen window, Grant Callahan watched her in silence, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. as a strange, unfamiliar thought crossed his mind. She looked like she belonged here. Not because she was performing chores, or because she said little and asked for less, but because she moved through the morning like the wind belonged to her, like her presence filled spaces that had long remained untouched by anyone's voice but his own. He didn't know how to name what he felt. He only knew that the house sounded different with her in it. Lighter, warmer, human. Upstairs, Noah was sprawled across the bed, with Sophie's denim jacket draped over his lap, sketching with colored pencils Grant had found in an old drawer, remnants of another time, another life. He was drawing a horse with wings mid-flight over a canyon. It's a Pegasus, he explained to Rachel later that morning, when she brought him a glass of warm milk and a slice of cornbread. He can fly away anytime he wants, even if people try to catch him. Rachel smiled, brushing the boy's curls gently from his forehead, a sadness in her eyes that didn't match the moment. "He sounds a lot like you," she whispered, hard to pin down, always looking for the sky. That afternoon, Grant took Noah out to the stables, showing him how to feed the horses, how to check the hay, how to move slowly and without fear. Rachel stood by the gate, watching arms cross the wind tugging at the hem of her dress, as Noah laughed for the first time in what felt like months. A high, pure sound that sliced through the quiet of the valley like sunlight through storm clouds. Grant glanced over his shoulder, met Rachel's eyes, and for just a moment, they didn't need to speak. The boy's joy had said everything. That evening, while Noah napped curled up under a throw blanket in the guest room, Rachel sat with Grant on the back porch. The sky above them, a canvas of indigo streaked with coral, the horizon trembling with the last heat of day. "I forgot what it's like to sit and not be scared," she said softly, her voice so quiet it nearly got lost in the chirping of the crickets. "To not be waiting for a phone call that ruins everything. To not be shrinking every time someone says my name like it's a crime." Grant said nothing for a moment, then replied, "You don't have to shrink here. Your name's safe in this valley." Rachel looked at him. "What if someone comes looking? What if they drag all this back up again? Then we'll deal with it," he said plainly. "You're not alone anymore." And just as the words settled between them, like a vow spoken beneath the stars, a pickup truck pulled slowly onto the long dirt path leading to the front of the ranch. Rachel froze, her body going rigid, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the wooden chair. Who would be coming this late? Grant stood calm but alert, walking around the porch to the front of the house just as the truck came to a full stop and the engine cut off. From inside stepped a middle-aged woman with sharp features, red lipstick, and a scarf tied around her perfectly styled hair. She wore designer sunglasses even in the fading dusk, and a faint smile played at the corner of her mouth like she was already rehearsing a script she had no intention of deviating from. Rachel didn't need to see her up close. Her heart recognized her footsteps before her eyes did. Delilah Hartman, the ghost who still breathed. Grant didn't flinch. "Can I help you?" he asked evenly. Delilah took off her sunglasses with a practiced grace. "I believe you're housing someone who doesn't belong here." Rachel stepped onto the porch, her shoulders squared despite the tremble in her spine. "What do you want?" "Delilah." The woman turned, her expression a mask of refined cruelty. "I've come to see my grandson. Noah belongs with his family, not in a stranger's house built on a pity project." Grant stepped forward. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but this is private property, and you weren't invited." Delilah smiled with the arrogance of someone who had never been denied a thing in her life. "I'm sure your hospitality has been commendable, but I have legal grounds to petition for Noah's custody. You'll be receiving papers by the end of the week." Rachel's voice cracked with controlled fury. "You left him bleeding on the side of the road. You and your son's cousins threw us out like we were nothing, and now you want to pretend you care." "Oh, Rachel," Delilah sighed. "You always were dramatic. This isn't personal. It's just unfortunate that the wrong people get to write the story when they're the ones who destroyed the plot." Grant stepped between them. "That's enough. If you've got something to say, you can tell it to a judge, but you won't say another word to her on my land." Delilah tilted her head, her smile never fading. "Very well. I'll see you both in court." And with that, she turned her heels clicking against the gravel as she slid into her truck and drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and an air so poisoned it made Rachel want to tear the sky apart just to breathe clean again. Grant turned to her. "We'll fight this," he said simply. "No matter what it takes." Rachel nodded slowly, her body shivering, despite the heat still clinging to the evening. She doesn't want Noah. She wants control. She wants revenge. Then let's take that from her, Grant said, piece by piece. That night, as Rachel tucked Noah in, she didn't tell him about the woman who had come. She didn't tell him that the ghosts of their past were clawing at the door again. She only kissed his forehead and whispered a story about a Pegasus who once fell from the sky, but landed in a garden that made him strong enough to fly again. Downstairs, Grant sat at the dining table, staring at the legal folders he had kept locked in a drawer for 6 years. Documents from Sophie's trust fund, letters from lawyers, and most of all, blank sheets of paper waiting to be filled with truth. Rachel walked in and sat beside him, her hands still red from gripping the edge of the porch earlier. "I won't run this time," she said, her voice low but solid. "I've run for too long. Noah deserves better. I deserve better." Grant looked at her, not as a man infatuated, not as a savior, but as a witness. "Then let's begin." And somewhere in the house, between old trauma and new resolve, between the echo of loss and the breath of hope, a single decision was made that would echo far beyond the gates of Crescent Valley. They wouldn't run, they would rise. The morning after Delilah Hartman's visit arrived, not with sunshine, but with clouds thick, low-hanging clouds that blanketed Crescent Valley Farm like a warning. Rain hadn't fallen in Sierra Ridge for weeks, but now the sky rumbled with a hush that felt personal, like nature itself had been stirred by the cruelty that had slithered through the ranch gates the night before. Rachel Monroe stood at the window of the guest room, arms wrapped around her waist, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the sky turn silver gray. Behind her, Noah still slept, his legs tangled in the blanket, his arm draped over the stuffed Pegasus Grant had left by his bedside. The child was blissfully unaware of the woman who had come to take him away, of the threats spoken in calm, venom-laced syllables, of the way Rachel had clutched the porch rail so tightly her knuckles split. She hadn't screamed when Delilah threatened her. She hadn't cried. But something inside her had shifted, something quiet and terrifying and ancient. Survival wasn't enough anymore. Silence wasn't enough. She couldn't raise Noah in the shadows of fear any longer. Not when his very name was being written into documents designed to erase her. She stepped away from the window, her bare feet moving quickly over the hardwood floor as she gathered her thoughts like weapons. Downstairs, Grant was already up. He was on the porch, his coat still damp from the misty air, his jaw-set eyes hard, flipping through a stack of legal papers he had unearthed from his storage chest the night before. The documents weren't about Rachel. They were about himself. Trusts, land deeds, financial records. All of them clean. All of them ironclad. He was a man who had lost everything once, but never lost control of what he built. He wouldn't let someone like Delilah Hartman twist the law into a weapon. When Rachel stepped onto the porch, he didn't look up at first. But then she said quietly, "She's going to file for custody." "I know," he replied. "And I know what she's capable of." Rachel sat down beside him. "She's not coming after Noah because she wants him. She's coming because she wants me to break. She wants me to vanish, to disappear like I never existed." "Then don't," Grant said simply. "Make her look you in the eye in a courtroom. Make her say out loud what she did." Rachel turned to him. "And if I lose, then you lose standing up, not crawling away, and you won't lose." Her throat tightened. "Grant, you don't know the lengths they'll go to. They have connections, money, lies polished to sound like truth." "So do we," he said. "Except we have something better. We have evidence. We have people who've seen the truth. And we have a reason that's real." Rachel stared at the gravel driveway, the same one she had walked across barefoot bleeding just days ago. "I used to think that staying silent was the safest thing, that if I just stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone. But now I see. Silence is what they count on. They think if they shame me enough, I'll surrender everything." "You won't," Grant said. "You already didn't." Just then the door creaked open behind them. Noah stepped out in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Mom Rachel turned quickly, rising. "Hey baby, you okay?" He nodded sleepily. "I had a dream. You and Mr. Grant were superheroes." Grant chuckled softly. "That sounds about right." "No capes, though," Noah added seriously. "Because capes get stuck indoors." Rachel knelt, kissed the top of his head, and hugged him tightly. And in that small, perfect moment, the war faded from her mind. There was only now. Only this child. Only this fragile, powerful love. But the world didn't wait long to remind her. That afternoon, a courier arrived. A woman in a brown uniform stepped out of a van, asked for Rachel by name, and handed over an envelope bearing the red seal of Shady Ridge County Court. Rachel took it without speaking. Her hands didn't tremble. She walked into the kitchen, sliced the envelope open, and read the first lines: "Petition for custody of minor child. Noah Monroe, filed by Delilah Hartman, claiming biological grandparent rights. Grounds unstable living conditions. Unfit, parent alleged criminal instability." She folded the paper and laid it on the table. "It's real now," she said aloud, her voice even. Grant walked in from the barn, saw her face, and didn't need to ask. "We fight," he said. "Together." "I want to tell my story," she said suddenly. "Not just to the court. I want people to hear it. I want the lies exposed. I want the smear campaign burned to the ground." Grant nodded slowly. "Then there's someone you need to meet." That evening, under a sky finally giving way to soft rain, they drove to the edge of town, where a small building stood, tucked between a shuttered antique store and an old barber shop. The sign above the door read, "Logan Reed, freelance investigative journalist." Inside, the air smelled like coffee and ink. A man in his early 30s sat behind a desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp behind silver-rimmed glasses. He looked up as they entered, then stood and extended a hand. "You must be Rachel. I've heard your name, but I'd rather hear your voice." Rachel stepped forward, unsure at first, but then she saw something in Logan's eyes: curiosity, not judgment, integrity, not pity. She sat down, and she began to speak, slowly, haltingly at first, but then with growing strength she recounted the story she had buried deep for too long. About Chase, about the gaslighting, about the night he died, drunk, raging not because of her, but because of a call from his mistress. About the lies Delilah planted, about the will they changed, the safe they emptied, the bruises that didn't make it into the medical records. Logan didn't interrupt. He took notes with a fountain pen, occasionally nodding, never once breaking eye contact. When she finished, he closed his notebook gently. "Do you want to clear your name, or do you want to make them wish they'd never touched you?" Both, Rachel said. "But mostly, I want to make sure my son never hears those lies and thinks any of it was his fault." Logan leaned back. "Then we start tonight. And we don't stop until every piece of this puzzle is on the table." They left his office an hour later with copies of legal documents in Rachel's hands and a plan forming in all of their minds. The storm outside had finally begun to fall in earnest. Rain danced against the windshield as they drove back to Crescent Valley. But inside the car, there was no fear, only a silent rhythm between two people who had once lived through fire and now chose not to run from the rain. Back at the farmhouse, Noah slept peacefully. Rachel tucked him in, then sat by the window, watching the lightning flicker across the valley, her reflection barely visible in the glass. She didn't recognize herself, this woman who no longer flinched at confrontation, who no longer apologized for existing. Behind her, Grant appeared holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her without a word. She accepted it, fingers brushing his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm raged outside. But inside the house, inside their hearts, another kind of thunder rolled. Not the thunder of destruction, but the beginning of a reckoning. And neither of them would face it alone. The next morning arrived, not with rain, but with fog thick and unmoving, draping the valley like a funeral shroud. The hills surrounding Crescent Valley Farm faded into mist, and the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath before a long scream. Rachel Monroe stood at the bathroom mirror, her fingers carefully tying her hair into a braid, as she studied the reflection staring back at her. It wasn't the same woman who had been thrown out of a black SUV days ago. That woman had been bruise-shaken, disoriented. This woman had fire in her eyes. Not the wildfire of rage, but the slow, enduring burn of someone who had decided, once and for all, that silence was no longer a shield and shame was no longer her burden to carry. Downstairs, the table had already been set. Noah was sitting at the bench eating pancakes, talking excitedly about a horse named Comet that he had seen out in the field. Grant Callahan poured syrup with the ease of a man who'd found unexpected comfort in fatherhood. Rachel paused for a moment at the foot of the stairs, watching the scene, as if from a distance, a bittersweet ache stirring in her chest. It was everything she'd never dared to hope for a normal morning: a safe home, laughter that didn't have to be whispered, but the world outside hadn't changed, and today she would face it. I need to go into town, she said after breakfast. Grant looked up, his brow furrowed. You sure you're ready for that? No, she answered. But I'm going anyway. Noah looked between them. Can I come? Not this time, sweetheart, she said gently. Just need to get some things. Be careful. The boy said, far too wise for his age. Grant offered to drive her, but she declined. She needed to do this on her own. She needed the weight of each step, the sound of her heels on the pavement, the burn of every glance to remind her that reclaiming herself would not be clean. It would be earned with scars. The streets of Sierra Ridge hadn't changed. The general store still had the same faded awning. The bakery still displayed its pecan pies behind the glass. But everything felt different. The moment Rachel stepped onto Main Street, heads turned. Conversations dropped. A mother pulled her child a little closer. A clerk leaned forward to whisper something to a customer. Rachel kept walking. She walked like a woman who didn't notice, but she noticed everything. Every glance, every silence, every memory painted across their eyes, as if they already knew her story and had chosen a side. At the pharmacy, the clerk didn't greet her. He took her money without eye contact and set the bag down on the counter with a finality that felt like rejection. At the bakery, the owner tossed her change onto the counter, then turned away. Not a word, not a smile, just absence. The weight of it pressed against her lungs like smoke. But she didn't break. She didn't speak. She didn't plead for understanding. She carried the bag of medicine and bread as if it weighed nothing, as if her dignity hadn't been chipped by every moment. Outside near the square, children laughed and played. Their joy clashed so violently with the atmosphere around her, it made her eyes sting. And that was when she heard the voice she had known would come. Well, well said, Delilah Hartman. Stepping out from a boutique in a crimson trench coat and oversized sunglasses, her lips painted the same color as her coat. Rachel Monroe back on Main Street. That's brave or foolish. Rachel turned slowly. Her voice was calm even. Delilah. I must say, Delilah continued with theatrical grace, you're certainly committed to your role. The poor widow, the victim, the misunderstood. And you're still committed to controlling a legacy that was never yours, Rachel replied. Noah doesn't belong to your family's lies. He belongs to people with stability, Delilah hissed. Not a woman who sleeps in barns and lives off charity. I don't need your approval, Rachel said louder this time. People nearby turned. I never did. I survived your son. I'll survive you too. Delilah's smile flickered. For a moment, just a second, something behind her eyes cracked, but she recovered. Let's see if the judge agrees, she said. See you in court. And with that, she walked away, the heels of her boots clicking like gunshots against the sidewalk. Rachel stood still. The silence that followed wasn't just judgment, it was tension. A test. And then someone stepped forward. Nora Jacobs, wife of Sheriff Dale. Jacobs placed her hand on Rachel's arm. Don't let her rattle you, she whispered. People forget fast, especially when the truth comes out. Rachel blinked in shock. You believe me? I believe what I've seen with my own eyes, Nora said, and I've seen mothers, real ones. You're the real kind. Rachel's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Nora said. Fight well. They don't expect women like us to stand up. But that's exactly why we have to. Later that night, Rachel recounted everything to Grant as they sat near the fireplace. The room was warm, but her fingers still trembled. They think I'm nothing, she whispered. That I'm a problem to sweep away. Then let them think it. Grant said, his voice steady. And let them choke on their surprise. Just then, his phone rang. It was Logan. I have something the journalist said. Big. You'll want to see it. The next morning, they met Logan at the county records office. He had spent the night combing through property deeds and inheritance contracts. What he found was damning. Look here, he said, pointing to a photocopied land transfer form dated 2 years ago. This land, 40 acres, was moved from Silas Whitmore's name to a company owned by Chase Hartman, signed under power of attorney by Charles Langston. That's not legal, Grant said. I never gave anyone that authority, exactly, Logan said. And the man who notarized it, dead 2 weeks later. Stroke. No witnesses. Rachel stared at the paper. Delilah knew, more than knew Logan said. She orchestrated it. Rachel looked at Grant. This isn't just about Noah anymore. This is about everything they've stolen. Then we take it back, Grant said. One truth at a time. That night, while Noah slept soundly in his bed, Rachel sat on the porch alone. The fog had lifted. The stars were out scattered across the sky, like someone had spilled light across darkness. She thought about everything she had lost, everything they had taken, and then she thought about Noah, about Grant, about the possibility of a life not lived in fear. And she made a promise to herself not just to survive, but to rise. And this time, not even Delilah Hartman would be able to stop her. 3 days after Logan Reed uncovered the forged land transfer, the quiet calm of Crescent Valley was replaced with urgency. A subtle tension in every step Rachel Monroe took, in every rustle of paperwork, spread across the long dining table, in every look she exchanged with Grant Callahan when they passed each other in the hall. The house had transformed from a place of refuge into a command center, its walls holding more than furniture now. They held plans proof and a rising storm. Rachel moved through it all with a strange new steadiness. The fear hadn't disappeared. It simply had no place to live anymore. There was too much to do, too much to protect, too much truth begging to be heard. That morning, while Noah worked quietly at the kitchen table, drawing a storybook he titled The Boy and the Lightning Horse, Rachel sat across from Logan and Grant, scanning through copied legal forms and investigative notes. "I know how this plays," she said firmly. "They'll try to tear apart my credibility, paint me unstable, angry, bitter. They'll say I'm a woman scorned trying to use a child as leverage. But I won't let them turn Noah into a pawn." Logan tapped his pen against his notebook. "That's exactly why we need more than documents. We need voices, eyewitnesses. Someone from that estate who saw what really happened the day you were thrown out or before." Rachel hesitated. There was one woman, a housekeeper, Sophia Martinez. She worked for the Hartmans for almost 15 years. She used to bring me tea when I was too sick to come downstairs. She saw the bruises once, asked if I needed help, but I told her to stay quiet. I didn't want her fired. "Do you know where she is now?" Logan asked. "No," Rachel admitted. "After Chase died and Delilah cleaned house, I never saw her again. I assume she was let go." "I'll find her," Logan said, already reaching for his laptop. "People like Sophia don't forget, not when they've seen real harm." While Logan worked, Grant stepped outside to call his lawyer. Rachel remained in the kitchen, staring out the window at the field where Noah and the horse named Comet now ran together, as if they had always known each other. Something about the sight of her son in motion again, moving freely without fear, stirred something ancient in her bones. It reminded her of her own childhood, of long-forgotten summer days when laughter didn't come with consequences. And it reminded her of why she could not afford to lose. That afternoon, Logan returned with news. "Found her," he said. "Sophia. She's in a town just outside of Tucson. Took up work as a home nurse after leaving the estate. She's agreed to talk to you face to face." Rachel's breath hitched. "Did you tell her who I was?" "No," Logan said. "I didn't have to. When I mentioned the name Hartman, she asked if this had anything to do with you. She said, and I quote, 'I've been waiting for this call for years.'" The drive to Tucson took 3 hours. Rachel insisted on going alone. Grant offered to come, but she declined gently. "This is my ghost," she said. "I need to face it without a shield." She arrived at a modest adobe home with a blooming cactus garden and soft wind chimes swaying in the desert breeze. When Sophia Martinez opened the door, her face lit up, not with surprise, but with something far more powerful recognition. "Senora Monroe," she said softly, "you're thinner. But your eyes haven't changed." Rachel felt her throat tighten, tears threatening, but she swallowed them down. "I never got to thank you," she said. "You were the only person in that house who ever saw me." Sophia stepped aside and welcomed her in. The house smelled of mint tea and lavender, a quiet sanctuary that felt untouched by the venom of Sierra Ridge. They sat across from each other on a sofa that had faded with time but still held warmth. "Tell me what you need," Sophia said. Rachel took a deep breath. "I need the truth. I need someone who saw what really happened, how they treated me, what they did after Chase died, the lies they spun." Sophia's face darkened with memory. "They always treated you like a visitor, not a wife, not a mother, just a mistake they tolerated until they could erase it. The day they forced you out, I was in the hallway. I heard Delilah telling Charles Langston, 'Make sure the cameras are off before you drag her out. I don't want bruises this time.'" Rachel's hands trembled. "Can you swear to that I kept a journal?" Sophia said. dates, conversations. The things I couldn't say aloud I wrote down, for my own sanity. I didn't think anyone would believe me back then. But now I will speak. For you. For your boy. When Rachel left Sophia's house, she didn't drive straight back. She parked at the edge of a canyon just off the road and stood staring into the open vastness of the desert. The sky was bruised with clouds again, the horizon lit with threads of orange and silver. And for the first time in her adult life, Rachel felt not just heard, but backed, not alone, but armed. The following day, Sophia arrived at Crescent Valley with her journal in hand. She embraced Rachel at the door. "I brought more than memories," she said. "I brought truth in ink." Over tea, she gave Logan the pages, meticulous, dated, labeled. Verbal abuse, evidence of financial manipulation. Quotes from Delilah, transcribed word for word. Grant read silently, then looked up. "This is enough to shatter everything they've built." Rachel stood still, fingers grazing the fabric of the journal as if it were a sacred text. Then, let it begin. That night, as Noah lay beside her, watching old cartoons, Rachel turned to him and asked, "Do you remember that day on the road?" He looked at her eyes, gentle but clear. "I remember you were shaking, and I thought, if I stayed really still, you wouldn't cry." Her eyes stung. "You don't have to be still anymore," she said. "You're safe now." He nodded. "Because of Mr. Grant. Because of you," she whispered. "Because I refuse to let them take you again." Noah leaned against her shoulder. "Then can I tell people you're a superhero?" Rachel smiled. "Only if you draw me with a cape made of court documents." He laughed. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the lamp glowed warm. And in the next room, a stack of journal entries, photos, and notarized affidavits lay on a wooden table. Each word, a brick, each sentence, a strike against silence. The war for Noah's future had already begun. And this time, Rachel was not afraid to speak. This time, her truth had a voice. And it would echo. The article was published on a Thursday morning, quietly at first, like the sound of rain before the thunder. Logan Reed titled it, with intention, "The Silence of Rachel Monroe." What they didn't want you to know. It wasn't printed in a major newspaper. It appeared in a digital independent journal, read by civil rights lawyers, trauma advocates, and small-town journalists who believed stories were more than content, they were catalysts. But by noon, the story had traveled farther than any of them expected. It spread from inbox to inbox, phone to phone, picked up by 3 regional outlets within hours. The article was not just well-written, it was devastatingly human. It included scanned pages from Sophia's handwritten journal, quotes from Rachel legal filings of the forged land transfers, photos of bruises quietly taken years ago, and saved in an old email Rachel had once sent to herself just in case. It exposed not only the gaslighting and emotional abuse from her late husband, Chase Hartman, but also Delilah's orchestration of a post-mortem media smear campaign, the manipulation of custody paperwork, and the complicit silence of the Hartman estate. It even mentioned the involvement of Charles Langston, now deceased, whose shady dealings had previously been buried under polite legacy headlines. Rachel didn't check the article when it went live. She didn't have to. She had already lived it. But when she walked into town that afternoon to pick up groceries, she immediately felt the difference. The silence was still there, but it was a different kind. Not judgment, not condemnation. This silence was stunned. A woman at the post office froze mid-sentence when she saw her. A teenager outside the cafe lowered his phone slowly, as if unsure how to respond to seeing the woman from the article in real life. And then someone spoke. Rachel came a voice from behind. She turned to see Elsie Tate, owner of the local tailor shop, holding a bag of fabric and looking more nervous than Rachel had ever seen her. I read the piece," she said quietly. "I had no idea what you went through, what they did to you." Rachel didn't respond. Not out of coldness, but because she hadn't yet found the words to respond to recognition that wasn't soaked in hate. Elsie stepped forward. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I looked at you before. It wasn't right." Then she placed the bag of fabric into Rachel's arms and walked away without waiting for thanks. In her hand, Rachel found a bundle of embroidered swatches. On one was stitched the word, "Brave." By the time she reached the grocery store, 2 more people had nodded at her, one even managing, "Glad you're speaking out." But not everyone had turned. Inside the store, Mr. Downing, the same man who once hosted fundraisers for the Hartmans, refused to meet her gaze. He walked past her without a word. Another woman, Patricia Clark, openly muttered, "Some people love playing victim when they lose their man." But Rachel no longer flinched. She didn't clutch her purse tighter. She didn't shrink. She stood taller. She looked Patricia in the eye and replied calmly, "Some people lie for power, but the truth doesn't care who's uncomfortable." And for the first time, Patricia had no comeback. That evening, Logan arrived at the ranch with printed copies of the article, each one marked with red tabs for every section now being quoted by legal commentators online. "You've started something," he said. "This isn't just about your story anymore. This is about how many other women have been silenced in plain view." Rachel took the printout and held it in her lap. "Do you think it'll help in court?" "It already has," Logan replied. "A civil rights attorney from Phoenix just offered to co-counsel your custody case. Pro bono." Rachel's breath caught. Why? Because she read it, and she saw herself in it. Later, after Logan left and Noah was tucked into bed with Comet sleeping beside his blanket, Rachel sat on the front porch beside Grant. The night air was cool, the sky scattered with early stars, the scent of dry sage drifting in on the breeze. She held the printed article in her lap, her thumb tracing the edge of the paper. "I thought sharing it would feel like release," she murmured. "But instead, it feels like exposure, like I've walked into a room naked and lit a match." Grant leaned back in his chair. "Maybe. But everyone who ever hid in the dark is seeing your fire now." Rachel turned to him. "What if it's not enough? What if Delilah still wins? She has lawyers' wealth influence. She doesn't have what you have." Grant said, "She's never had to fight for something real. She's only ever bought it." Rachel looked down at her hands still faintly calloused from working the garden and smiled faintly. "I used to think surviving was enough, that if I could just stay out of their way, they'd forget me. But they never forget, because forgetting means they can't control the story." "Then rewrite it," Grant said, "page by page, and I'll help you hold the pen." Across town, Delilah Hartman sat in her study, the glow of her laptop illuminating the sharp angles of her face. The article stared back at her like an accusation. Her fingers drummed the surface of her wine glass. She had underestimated Rachel. She had thought the woman would disappear, sink back into shame, like so many others she had silenced before. But Rachel hadn't sunk. She had stood. Worse people were listening. Her lawyer had already called twice with concern. Public opinion, once firmly in her favor, had shifted. Not fully, but the cracks had begun. She closed the laptop slowly, her eyes narrowed. "So, you want a war?" she whispered. "Then you'll get one." The next morning, a new letter arrived at Crescent Valley, this time not a petition, but a summons. Rachel opened it with steady hands. "They're fast-tracking the court date," she said to Grant. 2 weeks from now." "Let them come," he said. "We're ready." Rachel looked at the paper, then beyond it to the fields, the hills, the place where her life had begun again. And in her heart she whispered to the girl she had once been, "We're not scared anymore." The wind picked up. The house creaked gently in its old bones. And deep inside it, truth waited sharp and awake and no longer afraid of being heard. The Shady Ridge County Courthouse stood like a monument to old money, and buried secrets, its marble columns and polished brass handles, more a stage for legacy than justice. But on the morning of Rachel Monroe's custody hearing, the building felt different. There was a tension in the air, as if the walls themselves sensed that something sacred was about to break open. Rachel arrived just after 8:00 a.m. in a simple navy blue dress, her hair pinned up, no makeup, but for a light gloss across her lips. She didn't come to impress. She came to testify. Grant walked beside her in a charcoal gray suit, understated but commanding. His hand rested briefly at the small of her back as they crossed the courthouse steps, not for possession, but for grounding. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters had shown up curious after Logan Reed's article sparked statewide interest. Locals packed the benches, many of them unable to decide whose side they were truly on. At the front of the room, Delilah Hartman sat with an air of superiority so refined it bordered on imperial. Her gray suit was pristine, her posture razor straight, her lips a muted rose, a practiced portrait of concern and self-righteousness. Beside her, her attorney, slim, silver-haired, Harvard-trained, organized a stack of folders with calm menace. Noah sat with Nora Jacobs and Dr. Ruth Lang in a private waiting room, unaware of the weight being carried in his name, just one door away. The Judge Honorable Maureen Calder entered promptly at 9:00. She was known for her fairness, but also for her precision. No theatrics, no indulgence, facts only. As the proceedings began, Delilah's attorney wasted no time painting Rachel as unstable, unemployed, and irresponsible. "My client seeks custody of the child, not out of spite," he said, with the poise of someone well-practiced in spin, but out of genuine concern. "Miss Monroe has resided in a remote location with no permanent income under the roof of a man to whom she is not legally bound. This is not stability. This is sentimentality masquerading as safety." Rachel sat still, her jaw tight, her hands folded. She said nothing, not yet. The judge turned to her attorney, a fierce woman from Phoenix named Dara Lynn, sharp-eyed and steady-voiced. "Miss Monroe," the judge said, "you may take the stand." Rachel stood. The room quieted. And as she stepped forward, a strange calm settled over her. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had finally been transformed into purpose. Dara began simply, "Ms. Monroe, would you please tell the court why you believe your son should remain in your care?" Rachel looked directly at the judge. "Because I'm the only one who's ever truly cared for him, not with gifts, not with appearances, but with presence. I was there when he had night terrors. I was there when he learned to read. I cleaned his cuts, made his meals, and held his hand when he asked me why his father yelled more than he smiled." Her voice didn't crack. Not once. When Chase Hartman died, his family didn't grieve, they mobilized. Within 48 hours, I was being accused of causing the accident. No evidence, no investigation, just headlines, just exile. "And why do you believe that happened?" Dara asked. "Because I was inconvenient," Rachel said plainly. "Because I knew too much. Because I was the wrong kind of wife for a family obsessed with image." The judge leaned forward. "Do you have any proof of the abuse you claim?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dara said, and handed over a folder. Inside were photographs, some old, some recent, documenting bruises, burns, and a single X-ray of Rachel's wrist from an injury labeled as a fall. Accompanying them was Sophia Martinez's sworn affidavit. The courtroom was silent. Delilah's face did not move, but her foot tapped once, twice beneath the table. Then Dara said, "Your Honor, we also request to call a surprise witness, Miss Sophia Martinez." Gasps scattered through the courtroom. Delilah's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. This witness was not disclosed during pretrial. Exception filed under Rule 403, Dara countered. Witness was located post-deposition relevant to abuse claims central to custody." The judge paused, then nodded. "Proceed." "One chance, counselor." The door opened, and in walked Sophia Martinez, gray cardigan, kind eyes, unshakable spine. Delilah paled. Sophia raised her hand, took her oath, and sat. Dara approached. "Miss Martinez, how long were you employed by the Hartman family? 15 years. Did you witness Rachel Monroe being mistreated?" "Yes," Sophia said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "I saw Mr. Hartman scream at her. I saw him grab her arm hard enough to bruise. I was told not to interfere. I kept notes. I brought them today." "Did you ever witness the family post-accident plan to discredit Ms. Monroe?" "Yes," Sophia said again. "Miss Delilah Hartman told Charles Langston, and I quote, 'We'll bury her in scandal. That way no one will care about the will.'" Delilah's face finally changed. Her mask cracked, not broken, but fissured. The judge turned to her. "Ms. Hartman, is there any truth to this statement?" Delilah stood. "I deny all of it," she said. "It's fabricated by a disgruntled former employee and a woman who failed to maintain a stable home." "You mean the woman your staff dragged onto a sidewalk and left in 100-degree heat with a bleeding child?" Grant Callahan's voice echoed across the courtroom as he stood from the bench. "I have dashcam footage from my vehicle the day I found them, time-stamped, geotagged with audio." Another wave of gasps. Dara held up a USB, submitted to court this morning. The judge held up a hand. "I will review that in chambers." She turned back to Rachel. "Ms. Monroe, final question. Why should this court trust you with this child's life?" Rachel looked straight ahead. "Because I've already saved it, more than once. And I'll keep doing it whether or not this courtroom believes me. But if you give him to them, he'll be raised to believe love is manipulation. He'll be taught to silence pain with performance. I want more for him, not because I'm perfect, but because I've lived what happens when truth is denied, and I won't let my son be swallowed by that lie." The judge sat back. The gavel had not yet fallen, but the room knew what had shifted. Outside, the sky darkened, not with storm, but with release. The truth once buried had been exhumed, and Delilah Hartman, for the first time in years, had nothing left to say. The courtroom fell into a breathless stillness, the kind that only arrives when truth has been laid bare, and everyone, friend or enemy, knows that nothing will ever be the same again. Judge Maureen Calder leaned back in her chair, the dash cam footage fresh in her mind, Sophia's unwavering testimony echoing like scripture, and Rachel Monroe's voice, firm, unbroken, still resonating with the clarity of someone who had learned to speak after years of being silenced. Delilah Hartman sat like stone, her lips pressed into a flat line, her perfectly manicured hands trembling ever so slightly as she tried to maintain the illusion of control. Her attorney whispered something urgently in her ear, but she didn't respond. She could feel it, the unraveling, the reckoning. And this time, there was no phone call, no donation, no private conversation that could steer the outcome. Because the court had seen something no PR firm could scrub away a mother's quiet courage, the judge adjusted her glasses and spoke. Having reviewed the evidence submitted, including sworn testimony character, references medical records, recorded footage, and investigative reports, she glanced toward Rachel, then to Grant. The court acknowledges a clear and disturbing pattern of coercion, manipulation, and emotional abuse surrounding the plaintiff's family, particularly in the events following the death of Mr. Chase Hartman. What began as a petition for custody has revealed a systemic effort to defame and destabilize Ms. Rachel Monroe. It is not this court's job to untangle the full extent of those efforts, but it is our responsibility to ensure that justice is served to the child at the center of this case. A pause. The room held its breath. Therefore, this court rules that Rachel Monroe shall retain full and permanent custody of her son, Noah Monroe. Furthermore, this court recognizes Mr. Grant Callahan as the legal co-guardian of Noah Monroe with all rights and responsibilities duly transferred. The petition from Ms. Delilah Hartman is hereby denied in full. And then, with one deliberate motion, the gavel came down. A sound so small, and yet it thundered through every heart in that room. Rachel sat frozen for a second, unable to process what had just happened. Then the tears came, not dramatic, not loud, but soft and overflowing, the kind of tears that rise when the body finally releases years of tension. She exhaled, and the room in its silence honored her. Grant reached for her hand, gripping it with steady, quiet strength. And when she looked at him, she didn't see a savior. She saw a partner, a man who had stood beside her without asking for anything but truth. Across the courtroom, Delilah stood slowly, her face pale. She turned, meeting Rachel's gaze for just a second, and for the first time, there was no smugness, no pretense, only a shadow of a woman who had lost not just control, but relevance. She walked out without a word, no appeal, no threats, just absence. Outside the courthouse, the sky had opened into soft sunlight, filtering through tall oak trees and reflecting against the courthouse steps, as if the world itself had shifted to let in something lighter. Noah waited in the hall with Dr. Ruth Lang and Nora Jacobs. The moment he saw Rachel, he ran. "Mom." She knelt as he jumped into her arms. "Is it over?" "It's over," she whispered. "You're staying with me. Always." Grant stood beside them, placing his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "And with me, if that's okay?" Noah looked up, smiling wide. "Like, forever?" "Forever sounds pretty good," Grant said. Rachel kissed Noah's forehead, then looked toward the sky. "We're free now," she whispered. "Really free." That evening back at Crescent Valley Farm, the house felt different. Not because the furniture had moved or the light had changed, but because something inside each of them had been rewritten. Rachel stood on the porch barefoot in the cooling dusk, watching Noah run through the field, with Comet trotting behind him. Grant walked out with 2 mugs of tea. To quiet nights, he said, handing one to her. To mornings without fear, she added. They stood shoulder to shoulder, saying nothing more. No declarations, no promises. Just presence, just breath. Inside the house was alive again. In the kitchen, the oven hummed with the sound of cornbread baking. On the table lay an unopened envelope from the Department of Education, Rachel's reinstated teaching license, granted quietly after Logan's article helped clear her name. Upstairs on Noah's nightstand rested a drawing he had finished just before sunset, 3 figures standing hand in hand beneath a rising sun. The title, written in blue crayon, read, "The Day We Stopped Running." And in the distance, Sierra Ridge held its silence, not out of denial this time, but out of respect. Because when a woman rises with truth, with love, and with fire, earned in silence, even the loudest lies must step aside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, peace had a home, and Rachel Monroe, mother survivor, truth teller, had finally stepped into the light where she belonged. 1 week had passed since the courtroom doors had closed behind them, yet the sound of the gavel still echoed in Rachel Monroe's bones, not as a haunting, but as an affirmation. For the first time in years, the silence around her no longer held danger. It held peace. She had woken up each morning, not with panic, but with purpose. Noah's laughter spilled through the farmhouse like sunlight filtering through lace curtains. The kitchen, once quiet and solemn, now smelled of cinnamon, of warm bread, of home. Even Grant Callahan, whose grief had once paced the hallways like a ghost, had begun to laugh more often, to speak without hesitation, to let himself exist in the present. And yet, in the middle of this quiet return to living, there was something else, something Rachel couldn't quite name. A restlessness that pressed gently against her ribs when the house was too still. A question that lived behind her smile. She stood on the porch that evening, watching the fields shimmer in the amber light, her arms wrapped around herself. She had everything she once prayed for. So, why did she feel like something was still unfinished? Grant stepped outside, drying his hands with a dish towel, his expression calm. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "I should be. But," she sighed, "it's strange. I fought so hard for this, for Noah, for the truth, for peace, and I have it. But I think part of me is still waiting for the next strike. Like, I can't believe it's over. Because it's never really over," Grant said. "We carry what we've been through, even when we're standing in the sunlight." Rachel looked at him. "Do you still carry them? Your wife, your daughter?" Grant's eyes softened, his voice quieter. "Every day, but now it's not weight. It's memory. There's a difference." She took that in slowly. "I want to believe that's possible for me, too." "It will be," he said. "You're not walking alone anymore." And then from the end of the gravel driveway came the faint crunch of tires. Both of them turned toward the sound. A dusty silver sedan pulled up and stopped. The engine idled for a moment before the door opened. A woman stepped out. Middle-aged, dark blazer, worn leather satchel over one shoulder. Her heels clicked softly against the stones as she approached the porch. "Rachel Monroe?" she asked. Rachel tensed. "Yes," the woman smiled gently. "My name is Evelyn Pratt. I'm with the Office of Child Welfare Investigation. May I speak with you?" Grant stepped forward instinctively. "She already won custody. Everything's documented. You can check the court." Evelyn raised a hand calmly. "This isn't about custody. It's something else." Rachel hesitated, her heart beginning to beat faster. "What is it?" Evelyn opened her satchel and pulled out a small folder worn at the corners. 3 years ago, your husband Chase Hartman was involved in a separate legal matter, a sealed case. At the time, it didn't involve you directly, but after the recent media coverage and legal reevaluation, something was flagged. Something about your son. Rachel's knees weakened slightly. Noah. Evelyn nodded. "We have reason to believe there were falsified records concerning his birth, specifically his medical and custodial documentation. There's a possibility," that she paused, choosing her words carefully, "that Chase Hartman may not have been Noah's biological father." The world tilted. Rachel's hand gripped the porch railing. "That's not possible," she whispered. I would have known. Normally, yes. But after his birth, Chase handled all documentation. He paid the hospital staff directly. And the facility, well, let's just say the records were edited before being submitted to the county." Rachel shook her head slowly. "Why would he do that?" Evelyn's voice dropped. "Because if Noah wasn't his biological child, he could still claim him as a legal heir, but use him to secure certain financial assets in Rachel's name. We believe he did this as a financial leverage tactic. But the DNA match was never officially verified." Grant stepped closer, steady but stunned. Are you saying Noah might not be? His Evelyn nodded gently. We're reopening the file. But we wanted you to know first, because if it's true, then not only does Noah have the right to know his biological lineage, but you, Rachel, were used, deceived, in more ways than you imagined. The folder in Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she offered it. I can leave this with you. You don't have to decide anything now. But if you're open to it, we can do a DNA verification, privately. No press, just truth. Rachel reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the manila edges of a truth she hadn't asked for, but could no longer avoid. I need time, she whispered. Evelyn nodded. Take all the time you need. Then she turned, walked back to her car, and disappeared into the descending twilight. Silence returned to the porch, but it was no longer peaceful. It was trembling. Grant reached for Rachel's hand. Whatever this is, we face it together. She nodded, eyes wide, mind reeling. Because in all the battles she had fought, all the wounds she had stitched herself, she had never once doubted the one thing she held most sacred, the bond between her and Noah. But now, even that had been drawn into question, not by a court or an enemy, but by a ghost from the past, and the possibility of a truth that could unravel the very fabric of their story. And in the gathering dusk, as the stars blinked awake one by one, Rachel held the folder to her chest and whispered a single broken prayer. Please let love be enough to hold us through what's coming next. The folder sat on the kitchen table like a loaded question. Neither Rachel nor Grant had touched it since Evelyn Pratt left. It remained sealed, its manila cover dulled by twilight corners, bent as if even the paper knew the weight of what it contained. Rachel hadn't spoken since they came inside. She stood by the sink, unmoving, her arms crossed over her chest, as if holding herself together was now a physical act. Grant stood by the counter, silent, giving her the space she didn't ask for, but so clearly needed. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound in the house, steady and almost cruel in its normalcy. After what felt like an hour, Rachel finally moved. She sat down slowly in the chair across from the folder, her fingers hovering above it. Then she looked up, her eyes glassy but dry. I can't breathe, she whispered. I feel like if I open this, my whole life will change again. Like I finally patched the wound and someone just pulled out the stitches. Grant moved to her side, crouching beside her chair. You don't have to open it now. Or tomorrow. Or ever, if that's your choice. She looked down at him. But what if I have to know? Then I'll be right here, he said. Whether you open it or not, Rachel Noah is your son. That hasn't changed. That never will. But what if I was lied to from the start? She choked. What if I'm not even the person I thought I was all these years? What if I fought the wrong war? No, Grant said gently but firmly. You fought for love, for truth, for him. There's no war more right than that. That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, her arms wrapped around a pillow. She could hear Noah's soft breathing down the hall, the rhythmic rise and fall of a child at peace. And that was what shattered her the most. That peace was hers to protect. But what if it wasn't hers to begin with? At dawn, the decision came quietly. Not as a jolt, not as an emotional flood, but as a whisper from somewhere deep inside her soul. I have to know. Not for me, for him. She slipped out of bed, dressed in silence, and walked to the kitchen. The folder was still there. Grant, already awake and sipping coffee, looked up, but didn't speak. Rachel opened the folder. Inside was a single authorization form, a prepaid DNA test kit, and a note handwritten by Evelyn. No matter the outcome, this does not define you. Truth is not a weapon. It is a bridge. Rachel stared at the paper for a long time, then picked up the pen. She signed. The test was done privately later that day. Noah didn't know. Rachel couldn't bear to tell him, not until she had something real, something clear. In the days that followed, life resumed its fragile rhythm. They gardened. They made cinnamon rolls. Noah painted horses with wings and told Grant about a dad rocket ship he wanted to build. Rachel tried to smile, but it was paper thin. Every moment with him was treasured and tortured. Every laugh, every hug came with the ghost of a question. What if he's not mine by blood? What if I'm just a chapter in his story, not the beginning? A week later, the envelope arrived. No return address, just a red stamp that read, confidential. Grant found it in the mailbox and handed it to her without a word. Rachel stared at it for hours. She couldn't bring herself to tear the seal, until finally near midnight she did. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines, and stopped on a single sentence that cracked her entire world open. Probability of maternity. 0.00%. Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, the letter falling beside her. Grant rushed to her, his arms catching her before she collapsed entirely. Rachel, what? She looked at him hollow. He's not mine. What do you mean? The test. It says I'm not biologically his mother. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like poison she'd never imagined she'd taste. It was all a lie, Grant. Every single thing. Chase, he lied to me. He made me believe Noah was mine. He used me to raise someone else's child. Grant was stunned. But, Rachel, you carried him. You nursed him. I remember holding him, she whispered. I remember feeling him kick. But now I don't know if it was real. What if I was sedated? What if he was swapped in the hospital? I don't know what was real anymore. You are, Grant said. You are real, and your love for him is real. But what if I don't have the right to him anymore? Then the law can fight us, he said. But love won't. That child has only ever known one mother, and it's you. She sobbed silently into his chest. How do I tell him? The truth, Grant said, not the whole of it, not now. But enough for his heart to understand that love isn't made in blood, it's made in moments. The next morning, Rachel sat beside Noah on the porch swing. The air was light, the sun warm. He leaned against her as she watched him for a long while. Noah, she began. Can I ask you something? Sure, Mom. What makes someone your mom? He blinked surprised, then tilted his head. Easy. You do. Why? Because you're the one who stayed. You're the one who sings when I have bad dreams. You're the one who knew I liked blueberry pancakes before I even said it, she smiled, eyes brimming. That's it. Well, he said, scooting closer, and because when I'm with you, it feels like I belong somewhere. She pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his hair. You always will, no matter what. Did something happen? He asked, sensing the weight in her voice. Just something I needed to remember, she whispered. That being a mother isn't something given. It's something earned, and I'm never going to stop earning it with you. Behind them, Grant stood by the porch post, quiet and watchful. And inside the house, the letter lay tucked inside a drawer, not erased, but folded away. Because Rachel now understood, biology had written no part of the love story that unfolded in that farmhouse. Only choice had. And she had chosen Noah again and again, just as she always would. Blood may carry memory, but love carried the miracle. May 12th, my 28th birthday. I'm sitting at the desk by the east-facing window in the farmhouse I once ran through, with bare feet chasing a horse named Comet, and my little sister Grace, who always laughed louder than the wind. The same sunlight still filters in through the lace curtains Mom made by hand. And even now, after everything, I still wake up early just to catch the first rays touch the fields, because Mom used to say sunrise is where broken things remember they're whole again. I believe that, because I was one of those broken things once. A boy found unconscious on the side of a road, his arm bruised, his mother's dress torn, the world cruel and indifferent. A child of confusion, a child of someone else's deception. But none of that defined me. What did a woman who knelt beside me even when her knees bled? A woman who held me not because she was told to, but because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. A woman named Rachel Monroe, who refused to abandon a child that biology said didn't belong to her, but love insisted did. I found out the full truth when I turned 18. Mom told me with trembling hands, eyes steady, but heart breaking open. She thought I'd be angry. She thought I'd want to find where I came from. But what she didn't know was I already had. The moment I opened my eyes in that sunlit guest room years ago and saw her wiping sweat from my forehead, that was my beginning. That was my origin. She didn't give me blood. She gave me everything else. I've kept every journal she wrote in the classroom she started at Crescent Valley, every lesson plan, every note she left in my lunchbox. Be kind today. Use your voice even if it shakes. You're already enough. I carry those words like armor now. I became a writer, a teacher, a husband, a father. I still live on the farm with my wife Anna and our daughter Rachel Grace Monroe. We call her Ray. Mom cried when she held her for the first time. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she saw the beginning of a new story. One that wouldn't start in trauma. One that began in peace. Grant still fixes fences and tends the fields, but mostly he tells long stories in the barn about the first time he saw my mom and thought there's a woman who doesn't need saving but deserves to be safe. He was the first man I ever called Dad, and he still is. We buried the past, not to forget it, but so something better could grow in its place. And it did. A community school that stands where silence once reigned. A classroom filled with laughter, not shame. A family not defined by DNA, but by daily choice. Sometimes people ask me if I ever met my biological parents. I didn't. I don't need to. Because the people who raised me didn't just save my life, they built it with calloused hands and relentless hearts. This letter is for my mother, my real one, the one who chose me even when she didn't know the truth, who loved me harder because of it, who faced a courtroom, a town, a legacy of lies, and never let go. Mom, you once told me you were afraid of not being enough, but you were more than enough. You were everything, and I'm proud to carry your name. Love, Noah Monroe Callahan, your son. Always. In the final scene, the camera pulls back from the farmhouse porch. Rachel, now older, sits on a bench with Ray asleep in her lap. Grant places a blanket around both of them. The sunset glows soft and golden behind them, wrapping the valley in light. On the wooden gate at the entrance to the ranch, a hand-carved sign reads, Sunrise Ranch, where stories begin again. And somewhere in the wind, the world knows. This wasn't a story of blood. It was a story of love. And love always finds its way home. Sometimes family isn't made by blood. It's forged in the fires we survive together, and the love we choose again and again. Rachel didn't need a DNA test to be a mother. She needed courage, and she had more than enough. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who never gave up on you, or someone you'll never give up on, tell us in the comments. Because stories like this don't just deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered. Drop your thoughts below. Like if you believe love is stronger than blood. Subscribe to Flow Story for more real stories that heal, awaken, and inspire. You're not alone, and you never were. See you in the next story.